if one random guy just like learned some basic programming and was able to make this much of a difference, how amazing would it be if I could actually learn to code properly and then help other people learn to code so that they could do this within their own organizations.
Welcome to Crazy Good Turns. This is a podcast that recognizes and celebrates people who do crazy good things for others. I'm your host, Frank Blake. Our guest today is truly an extraordinary person. Quincy Larson is the founder of Free Code Camp. It's remarkable from the perspective of what he's achieved in a very short period of time. Free Code Camp was founded just in 2014 and is already now one of the top websites on earth and the biggest programming channel on YouTube. What he's done is also remarkable as a crazy good turn, because it's one of the most amazing acts of radical generosity you're going to encounter, because Free Code Camp is, as its name implies, free. So welcome, Quincy. I look forward to talking with you.
Thank you, Frank. I'm excited.
All right, so here's my starting question, and it's really going to be a two-part question, but I want to get the first part in, which is if you would describe a little bit the effort of teaching yourself about coding. It's not like you grew up as a coder and this was all, just a natural evolution. This was something different and was actually really difficult.
Yeah. Well, I started out age 31. I was a school director, and I was just helping run schools in the U.S. and in China, and helping adults learn English so that they could go to graduate school. Those were what most of my students were, adult age. And I just wanted to make the school a little bit more efficient. And so I was working with my teachers and just realized they were spending a huge amount of time at their desks doing paperwork and boring back office processes that didn't really help the students a whole lot. That just helped us administer the school. I mean, they were essential, responsibilities. But I just said, let me see if I can figure out some way to maybe automate some of this. And I didn't know anything about programming. I had been afraid of programming. And I'm the kind of person who would ask his wife for help with setting up the Wi-Fi router whenever we moved because I just didn't have the patience.
An English major graduate.
Yeah, and actually I am an English major.
All right.
I basically learned enough just from Googling around to be able to automate parts of the school. And it was such a profound thing because it really did make a difference. Like the students were all of a sudden very happy because they were spending much more time with their teachers. The teachers were happy. The entire morale of the school improved. And I started to think wow, if one random guy just learned some basic programming and was able to make this much of a difference, how amazing would it be if I could actually learn to code properly and then help other people learn to code so that they could do this within their own organizations. And so that was really what the epiphany that set me down the path of ultimately trying to build a whole bunch of different projects around education technology, the successful one being Free Code Camp that I eventually built.
And how long did it take you to get comfortable with coding and feeling like, oh yeah, this is a competency that I can aspire to and get?
Yeah, well, I'm not fully confident even today because I still feel like I'm in a giant ocean trying to stay afloat with all the new information and everything. But I do have a pretty strong fundamental background, and a lot of that is just because I read a lot of books. I used a lot of free online courses from universities, and I just hung out with a whole lot of developers around San Francisco and absorbed as much as I could from them about their philosophy and their approaches to getting problem solving, and really that's what programming is problem solving.
And so you delve into this. You spend, I assume, months. What you're describing is it's not a few hour exercise.
Yeah. It was several years.
Okay, several.
I left teaching and school directorship, and then about 2.5 years later is when I actually got Free Code Camp started. So it was a long process. And I worked as a software engineer for a while at a few different places and did a bunch of freelancing. And that was kind of how I actually applied my skills and solidified my knowledge, actually doing it where there's an end user and making sure that they had what they needed.
And at what point in this process do you go, okay, I'm going to set up something that's free? I've learned all this, I've got this skill, and now I'm going to figure out how to make it free to everyone.
Yeah. Well, I always wanted it to be free. It was just a question of how I was going to make it sustainable. And ultimately, the the simple way to make something that's free sustainable is just to ask for donations and incorporate it as a 501c3 nonprofit. And that's what we did. So we're a public charity and tax exempt and everything. And we just have thousands of people who donate to us. But it was not clear that was going to work. There were some pretty harrowing years. I put like about $150,000 of my own savings that I was going to put in, buying a house in California, which wouldn't have been a big house, but it would have maybe been a down payment. I took that money and basically just used that to pay for servers and keep us afloat for the first few years. And then we got tax exempt status and people started donating, and we just got better and better about figuring out ways to get people to donate and support us.
Well, so you make it almost like a throwaway. Well, I always wanted to make this free. Why? Why did you always want to make it free instead of, hey, this is a way for me to make big bucks, get that nice house in California, do a startup, et cetera, et cetera?
I'm, a pretty privileged person. I grew up here in the United States. I'm white. I'm a man. I'm a native English speaker. I have, all of these privileges. And for me, even with those privileges, it's been a pretty rough struggle. Like, I've had to work really hard, and I've had lots of setbacks, and I can only imagine what it's like if you grow up without those privileges. The thing I like to think about every day is about 2/3 of all people on earth live off less than $10 a day. And those people should not be spending money on coding courses, in my humble opinion. They should be spending money on food and clothing and electricity and basic things that they need to be able to survive and have a comfortable life. I really do believe that education should be free in many intents and purposes. Obviously, teachers should get paid and all that, but how can we get it to, how can we create a kind of a baseline of education that doesn't require a teacher and therefore doesn't have like a high variable cost associated with it? If you could drive down the marginal cost of everything through technology, you can make it free or close enough to free that you can support the entire operation off of a few thousand people giving $5 a month, which is what we've managed to do.
You were always going to do something that was charitably focused, and it happened to be coding, or as you got into coding, that sort of sparked this needs to be free to everyone, or a combination of the two.
Yeah. I mean, if I weren't running Free Code Camp, I'd probably be running a free English-related school online or something like that. Because English is like the area, English education, adult English is where I had my domain expertise prior for the past 10 years before I got into coding. So coding it was clear that with coding, you could go out and you could learn those skills and you could go get a really good job and transform your family's lifestyle. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to make it free.
And are there parts of coding that, in addition to obviously I got a job at the end of it, are there skill sets that it provides to people, something that you see that's really vital for people to connect with?
Yeah, well, I've worked a lot of rote jobs. I worked at Taco Bell for a few years. I worked at grocery stores, like bagging people's groceries and like mopping the floor and stuff. And those jobs weren't very actualizing. I didn't feel like excited to get there every day. I didn't feel like I was applying my creativity. One of the great things about coding is it is a very creative process, and it does use both kind of the analytical and the creative aspects of your personality and your mind. So I think it's a very fulfilling job, and I would argue that it's one of the more fulfilling kind of knowledge worker type roles that you can get. So coding is not only a great way to make a living, but it's also a very fun profession if you can kind of build up a passion for that.
Can you kind of take a step back and explain a little bit what your website is and how it works?
Absolutely. Yeah. Free Code Camp is the main thing that people think of when they think of Free Code Camp is the 3,000-hour curriculum, which is a whole lot of interactive learning. You're basically in a code editor and you're trying to get different tests to pass and you're learning different concepts in a kind of a progressively difficult and progressively Byzantine way. And as you progress through the curriculum, you get positive feedback. You can ask for help on the forum. We have a big forum where thousands of people ask questions and answer questions and give feedback on different projects. And the big thing about the Free Code Camp curriculum is you're building a ton of projects. You're not just solving short little coding challenges. you very quickly progress to, okay, let's build a tribute page to your favorite author or your favorite humanitarian, or let's build an interactive dungeon crawler where you've got like a role-playing game. So you're actually taking what you've learned and you're applying it to build different projects, and you're being able to inject your personal creativity into those projects as well.
And if I were trying to get an equivalent degree at a university, it would be what, $40,000, $50,000, something like that?
It depends on if you go to like an in-state university here in the U.S. Yeah, it'd probably be 40, 50,000. If you go to like if you're an international student who's trying to come to the U.S. to get a degree, you're going to pay international tuition, and you're also going to have to deal with like visa and housing and all that. I mean, it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to be prohibitive for a lot of families. A lot of families save up their entire lives for this. Now, Free Code Camp is no replacement for a university. I want to emphasize that. Like, anybody who says, "Oh, you probably don't need to go to university," I would be willing to bet that person also went to university, right? So be skeptical of people who think they can wholesale replace university. But I will say that for people who've already gone to university and gotten an English major like I did, or studied some other field that they feel like they're kind of maxing out what they can do with it, Free Code Camp is a great supplemental learning resource that you can use to not have to go back to university or not have to go to graduate school. And that's kind of where we'd like to go, is reducing the total number of people who feel like they have to go to graduate school to gain new skills. Because if you've got kids, if you've got a job, going back to school is, it's very time intensive. And Free Code Camp is completely self-paced and in the browser, so you can just go and use it whenever you have time after the kids are asleep.
So you start Free Code Camp 6 years ago, and it's now just this enormous success. If you were rewinding the tape, what pieces of advice would you give to yourself of 6 years ago?
Yeah, well, I would just say once you find like even a little bit of traction, even a little bit of success, just totally focus on that. Tune out everything else, because I think you've probably heard the expression like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I would argue a bird in the hand is worth tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in the bush. I feel extremely lucky that something I did actually stuck and that people actually cared, because I toiled in obscurity for years building education tools that nobody cared to use. And then Free Code Camp is just the one. Once that really started to take off, I was like, oh, this is amazing. And of course, I always felt like, oh, I could also help with this. I could do this as well. But I've applied my self-discipline and just stayed completely focused on Free Code Camp. And there's not going to be like a second act for Quincy Larson. Like, this is it. I'm going to continue to focus on this specific project, because we are, the mission is impacting more than 40,000 people that we know of, just from looking at the LinkedIn alumni network, have gotten a job as a software engineer after having gone through Free Code Camp. Before they were in a different field, now they're in software engineering, and it's in part because they use Free Code Camp as a learning resource. That kind of impact, I'd be hard pressed to be able to create something else that has that level of impact. So I just count myself extremely fortunate. So my advice would just be focus very hard, see if you can get traction, see if you can get people who genuinely appreciate what you're doing, and that's a sign that you're heading in the right direction, and keep heading in that direction.
Was there a moment, during the development of this where you were really wondering, oh gosh, I have no idea whether this is going to stick, but I'm going to keep at it? Or was it pretty clear from the start that this was going to work well?
Once people started using it, the main concern was, okay, this is great, but this is a free tool that we're scaling to quickly millions of people were using it. And how are we going to make this sustainable? So that was where I had to take convince my wife, okay, this is going to work out. We're going to be all right if we just take this money that we've been saving up our entire careers and put this into Free Code Camp, right? Yeah, so it was really touch and go from the sustainability point, but I was very fortunate to never have an issue with people caring about the project and contributing. And that's the other thing that I obviously need to mention here, is that Free Code Camp would be a shadow of itself without all the volunteer contributors around the world who've kind of taken up the cause and have put in lots of time and energy into the code base, into asking and answering questions on the forum, into writing articles and creating videos for the YouTube. I'm a very small piece of this puzzle. Most of the work within the Free Code Camp community is done by volunteers at this point. And I don't think we could work if everything was done by me or by some other paid team member.
No, your idea has connected with just tens of thousands of other people. I mean, it's really extraordinary. I also think, and I'll say this again, I think you're being way too modest in terms of your own generosity. I mean, there are many people with your same privileges who don't internalize those as privileges and figure out, how do I monetize this? And as far as I can tell, you're not making any effort to do that. This remains very focused on, as I said at the start, a very radical act of generosity.
I mean, I have what I need. My kids are healthy. We moved to Dallas recently. We're in Plano. We found a school district public school district that had really good schools, and we just want to hunker down and focus on our kids. And I'm not wanting for much. I've got my Toyota van that gets us where we need to go, and I'm paying off my mortgage and everything. So I'm happy. I just want to be able to focus on my work.
If you reflect on the success of Free Code Camp and the people who are contributing voluntarily, as you say, their learnings, their advice, what have you learned about generosity, whether your own generosity, the generosity of others? What do you think prompts it? Are you surprised at the level of it, or disappointed that there isn't more of it? Or how do you think about that?
Well, I can tell you that generosity, you kind of get addicted to that feeling of helping other people. Not just having people say, oh, this is great, this really helped me, this changed my life. In some cases, I get emails like that, and that's always really profound, and you want to kind of stop what you're doing and just reflect on that for a few minutes. But just the notion that you're helping, like that sensation, I know I'm helping. I know when I push this article out, a lot of people are going to use it and they're going to benefit from it. Just putting artifacts out there, like basically putting things out there on the web that people can discover and can help them get unstuck. That's it gets addictive because you want to see how far can I go? How many I've got maybe 40 years left on Earth. How many people can I help? How much net positive can I be to society? And so that kind of sensation is, you're not really comparing yourself to anybody else. You're just comparing yourself to the best possible world's version of you, who's the most virtuous and the most deliberate and the most effective in terms of just sitting down and getting things done. It's kind of like I'm chasing that ideal. And so I think if people can think in terms of that, instead of comparing yourself to other people, just think about okay, if I had my needs met and if I was able to figure out a way where I could sustain myself and sustain my family and really be able to block out time to focus on doing something good. And maybe you want to continue to work full time, but you just want to do this part time. How can I help the maximum number of people with my scarce time here? If you start thinking in those terms, then I think it becomes a lot easier to get up out of bed and to put in the time even when you're tired, because you can justify it because you've got, maybe you have a vision of a specific person that you want to help. Maybe it's just you when you were a kid. Maybe it's, more abstract where it's a kid you met when you were overseas. And you're just I wish I could help this kid. Well, you can help that kid. Just see if you can think about how.
That is such a perfect statement. And it leads me to want to ask, do you have that specific person, or was it more generic, more general?
I lived in China for 6 years. And when I was over there, I met my wife in grad school. I went with her back to her village. It was basically a bunch of concrete. Because China's so populous, people think of a village, they think of maybe huts and things like that. This was concrete buildings and bare brick, and just a lot of chickens running through the streets and stuff like that. And everybody there was very nice, and they were clearly, making do with what they had. But I did see the kids there just playing and hanging out, and I thought I wonder if they have access to the internet, and I wonder if they're able to get online and learn things outside of what is local, available at their local school and all that. And that was one of the big revelations. Hey, I might be able to actually help. I may be able to play a part in making sure that these kids get access to good information about something at some point, and make sure that their English is really good. At the time, I was thinking in terms of English. So often I think back to that village, and I go back there every time I go to China because we do still have family over there. So I think about them a lot and how I can help them. And then I think, okay, this is one village out of hundreds of thousands of villages, probably around Asia. And then you kind of zoom out and you realize, well, if by catering to these kids that are kind of like hanging out and helping their parents do chores around the village, I'm potentially catering to kids in every village that are like this. And as an indirect benefit, helping kids back from Oklahoma City, where I grew up. Just kind of stepping back and looking at the scale of which you can potentially address something is a huge motivational factor as well.
What a phenomenal expression of generosity and action. So, Quincy, are there people who've been through Free Code Camp who send you great stories? Is that part of the fuel that keeps you going? To say, boy, if it hadn't been for Free Code Camp, I was sleeping in my car and then I got to do this. And I mean, do you get those stories and that reinforcement?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of them come from here in the U.S. A lot of them are people who were, plenty of stories, people who were essentially, homeless or just kind of couch surfing and trying to figure out what to do going forward, who sat down and were able to eventually get like a contract with a local hospital or school or someplace to build some projects for them, and we're able to kind of gradually bootstrap a career from that. If you go overseas, there are a lot of people who grew up in the middle of a village that barely had internet connection or didn't have an internet connection, and they were able to learn Free Code Camp because they were able to get like a cousin to download it, and Free Code Camp can run on anything basically. It's extremely data light, and it's open source, which means that anybody can go and download the source code. And so a lot of people would just install it in like a local library and use a library computer in their village and would use that to level up their skills, and then eventually apply for a job and get a job at like a multinational company that happened to, they were able to move to the big city in some cases. So that happens all the time in like India, Nigeria.
How many people go visit the website, or how do you kind of track?
Yeah, about 500,000 people a day use Free Code Camp.
A day?
Yeah. So that's based on like our tracking tools. That's how many people use it. Now, a lot of people are hitting like the tutorials. We have tutorials outside of the core curriculum. We've got about 7,000 full-length tutorials or books that we published on programming, and a lot of people use those. And then a lot of people use the core curriculum. And then also YouTube is separate. Like it's not counted in the 500,000, but people spend about 1.2 million hours a month watching Free Code Camp courses on YouTube. It adds up. I actually just did the calculation. We did 1.3 billion minutes of usage just in the past year, in 2020. That's the equivalent of 2,500 years worth of people sitting on their computers using Free Code Camp in 1 year.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So to give you an idea, if you think about it in that terms, about 2,500 people are probably using Free Code Camp right now while you and I talk.
Wow. Congratulations. That's amazing. In terms of doing for others and doing something like this, do you look back and you say, boy, this person, here's someone in my life who was incredibly generous or did something for me at an important moment?
Yeah. I can tell you, like, I had this the science teacher, Mr. Krieger, and I've tried to find out information about him, but I haven't been able to find him. It was kind of like a low point in my life. I've been kicked out of school, and I got moved to like a pretty rough school. This was 7th grade, I think. 8th grade, yeah. And he would be really patient with me, and he would he'd like give me books to read. He'd be like, hey, read this outside of the curriculum. I always felt that, I was like, oh, this guy is so cool. Like, what is he doing at this school? Like he's so patient and so thoughtful compared to a lot of the other, students and admin and teachers that I've been interacting with. Seeing that, like at that low point in my life where I was getting, bullied every day and just having a pretty miserable time. I wasn't sleeping well. It was just a rough time, and puberty and everything. And just having this person in my life who believed in me and thought like, oh, this kid, he might benefit from reading some extra books outside of the class, and I might be able to help him. Just that gesture, I think, really woke me up though. Like, wow, like there are so many people who don't have a Mr. Krieger in their life. What's the next best thing? Well, hopefully like a community of people who can, if you don't have a mentor, a community of really kind people is the best substitute, in my opinion. And so that's what we've been trying to do with Free Code Camp.
And you have a massive community. Describe that a little bit. I mean, you've kind of talked about it around the edges, the massive community that's involved in Free Code Camp.
Yeah. So we have just a whole lot of people who contribute on the forum, answering questions, and it's just a really friendly place. Like, there are no dumb questions. Everybody who asks a question, we do our best to answer it. So they can ask programming questions. They can say, hey, here's my project that I built. Can somebody test it out and give me some feedback on it? Or we have this section called You Can Do This, where people who are like, oh, I can't do this. And programming's hard. Anybody who tells you programming isn't hard is trying to sell you something. It is very intellectually challenging, and it's also just like kind of grindy because you're going to keep getting error messages. You're going to have to look things up constantly, and you're going to feel like not a very smart person for most of your day. One of the uniquely challenging parts of programming is you're always working on something you've never worked on before, because if you had already figured out how to solve something, you would just use old code because you can infinitely reproduce past solutions, right? So the community is just a bunch of really kind people, all ages. We've had people with the military that have come and hung out and helped out. We've had people from overseas. Like, a lot of our top contributors are in Nigeria, for example, which is a country that has a whole lot of really ambitious people who are learning to program. A lot of people in Bangladesh, India, places like that are overseas. We just launched a Spanish edition, so we've got a whole lot of people from like Venezuela and Colombia and places like that are helping with the big localization effort into Spanish. So that's kind of the community. It's just a whole bunch of mostly adults. The average age of a person in our community is 30, and they're mostly just there because they are getting a lot out of free code camp. They want to make sure their friends and neighbors and everybody else gets value out of free code camp as well. So it's very much just like, this helped me, and I can actually help myself by helping other people. One of the things I often point out to people is the best way to solidify your own learning is to teach. And you have this great opportunity to just go on to the Free Code Camp forum or to write a tutorial that teaches exactly what you've just learned, and that'll help you further solidify it while also helping other people.
What you say is so interesting, because one of the things that struck me in reading about you and reading about Free Code Camp is that you self-describe as the teacher who founded Free Code Camp. I mean, that is your self-description as a teacher. Is that very much how you think about yourself?
Yeah, I think teachers are very important in history. I mean, if you go back to Confucius, Aristotle, all these great teachers through the ages have helped not only kind of shape the times, but have also helped inform the leadership and inform the general population. In the case of after the printing press, people were able to get access to the teachings of all kinds of different people. So I think teaching is an essential function, and I've always identified as a teacher, and I probably always will, because I feel like that's the most important. Like once you strip out the software engineer, once you strip out the executive director of this nonprofit and all that stuff, you get somebody who fundamentally just likes to hang out and teach people. And I love to go to a hacker space or a maker space, and just hang out with people and answer their question and look at what they're doing and ask them a bunch of questions to see if I can get them to teach themselves. That's the perfect, if you can use the Socratic method and just ask a bunch of questions and guide people toward their own answer, that's the most powerful way of teaching. So for me, it's just the most exhilarating thing is just teaching people.
I would recommend to any of our listeners, even if they're not interested in learning how to code, you wrote a great article about writing for Medium. And if you remember it, I'd love for you to kind of take our listeners through some of your points. You had a section on Write Smart, and that's WRITE, Write Smart. And I thought, you could take these same principles, and whether you're working in business or building a company or whatever it might be, those same principles apply. It happened to be you were talking about writing. I just thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, thanks. I think the biggest thing that you can do to improve your writing, if those of you are out there, and even if you're just writing emails or letters to your loved ones, try to keep your sentences short. Try to keep your paragraphs short. When you can use a smaller word that does the same thing as a larger word, try to use that. There are tools out there that will tell you the reading level of your articles. There are 3 billion English speakers on Earth. A vast majority of those people did not grow up speaking English like you and I did, Frank. Most of them are learned English as a second language, and anything you can do to make it easier to read and understand something is a bonus. And then the positive benefit of writing simply and writing in a way that people can easily understand is people who are native speakers or have advanced degrees and know a lot, like spend a lot of time reading, they can read faster and understand better. So it's kind of a win-win if you can just simplify your writing and bullet points do work. Don't go overboard with bullet points. There are so many little things you can do to make yourself clearer. And a lot of society's problems, stepping back, a lot of history's problems come down to miscommunication. And communication is so vital. How do I get what's in my mind and take it and get it in some similar manner into your mind? That's writing and that's oration. And I would say if there's one skill that you want to get good at, it's writing, because then you get good at communicating everything else that you're good at, and you get good at communicating your value to everyone else.
I so completely agree with that. I'm just going to give 2 quotes because I love this so much in this segment on Write Smart. You, and I'm quoting now, you say, do yourself a favor, write what you know. If you have trouble coming up with at least 5 minutes worth of things to say on a topic, or if your story devolves into a list of bullet points, you don't know enough about it, which I think is such a great point. There's actually just a lot of knowledge that's got to ride along with what you're writing.
Yeah, and I think writer's block is just a matter of not knowing enough about a subject yet. You don't know enough to feel confident, and that lack of confidence is telling. It means you need to go back to the research phase.
I didn't realize until reading what you wrote here that there was a Hemingway app that actually strips out useless adverbs and makes words, finds a shorter word, a more concrete word. That's got to be very cool.
Yeah, I use it a lot, and it's probably the simplest tool that I recommend to people when they want to improve their writing. Just throw your writing in Hemingway and see what Hemingway highlights. It's just a simple algorithm. It can be wrong, but it's helpful because just the process of looking at your writing and thinking about it is very helpful. Because a lot of people just write and they don't really think a lot about their writing itself. But stepping back and reflecting, you can dramatically improve how you communicate.
Right. And communication, as you say, it's critical to pretty much everything. If you can't communicate, it's very difficult to make progress on anything. So 5 years from now, where is Free Code Camp? And where is Quincy Larson?
Hopefully more or less the same place we are now. Hopefully we can just do more of what we're doing. I feel, again, very blessed that we've managed to kind of figure out what works and what people want. Because so many of my friends have struggled to do that. And I'm confident that if they keep struggling, they'll eventually find a way they can plug in and help. We just want to do more. We want to teach more people. We want to make our curriculum even more robust and more exhaustive. We would love to basically have the equivalent of an entire computer science degree that's free and self-paced for people who didn't go to university or don't want to go back to university to get a computer science degree, for them to be able to learn all the math and computer science and engineering concepts and the applied art of programming. Right now we've got, essentially the equivalent of an associate's degree in terms of total coursework. And so it's just a matter of adding a lot of math and computer science and figuring out interactive ways to teach those rather than just relying on here's a bunch of text or here's a video. We really want to make these interactive because experiential learning, in my opinion, is the most effective in getting people to actually work with the mathematical expressions or work with the concepts in code. That's the best way to really solidify those concepts in people's minds and make it stick.
This is an obvious question in your case, but I always ask it. For listeners who want to find out more about you, where should they go?
Yeah, just check out freecodecamp.org. You can just start Googling around about programming, and you'll probably eventually find some Free Code Camp related stuff. But I will just close by saying you probably can learn programming. I think any sufficiently motivated person, regardless of age, can learn some programming. It's hard, but it's very rewarding. And it's one of those skills that you can turn around and immediately apply to make your life more efficient. So I encourage you to give it a try. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised if you're willing to tough out the initial frustration and everything and stick with it. I think you'll be very surprised how far you can come in a year of practice.
All right. Well, now I've got my goal in front of me. I want to end again by saying, Quincy, what a Thank you. It's a phenomenal thing you've done for tens and tens of thousands of people, and it's going to, as you say, next 5 years, it's going to be millions and millions and millions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you for listening to this episode. As always, I want to thank Megan Hanlon for the production of this podcast and Stephen Key for his editing and Score in Los Angeles. Thank you, and until next time, this is Frank Blake.